Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Joseph S. Samaniego, the author of the Carolingian Age fantasy book series, and I am here with another historian reaction video. This is from Epic TV, or Epic History TV, on Blackbeard. And growing up in North Carolina, born and raised, Blackbeard is like our folk hero, one of the major folk heroes. Yes, he was a criminal. Yes, he was a pirate. Yes, he did some bad things. But his legend here is every school kid knows it. You pretty much spend your 4th through 8th grades learning about piracy in North Carolina, learning about Blackbeard. You have Blackbeard days, you have celebrations in Beaufort and Swansboro, where he really made a lot of connections and really made his home. He actually had a wife there, one of many. Most people think he might have been a polygamist. Or he just didn't really care for the Church of England, so he didn't really care the rules. But whatever the case, he had a wife in Beaufort at one point. There's a kind of a famous ghost story about her. A lot of ghost stories about Blackbeard himself, but he really did kind of capture the mind's eye and the imaginations of people here in North Carolina. So we're always interested in him. Pirates, this was a very, very lucrative area for pirates, for merchants as well. And so let's see what they got to say about him. Let's see, we know, he's all over right now with Our Flag Means Death. It was in the Pirates of the Caribbean movie I think it was Stranger Tides, I believe it was. He was also featured in Black Sails. Most people know him Edward Teach, Edward Thatch, Edward Teague, possibly. We're not sure his true name. Thatch has kind of come out as being probably the most likely lately. But if you were to ask people in North Carolina what Blackbeard's real name was, they would say Edward Teach, because that's what we've always heard. So let's get into it.
Blackbeard's early life is shrouded in mystery. His real name was probably Edward Thatch, and he may have been a sailor from the English port of Bristol. Some believe he fought in the War of Spanish Succession, at the end of which he found himself unemployed in the Caribbean in the last great age of piracy.
And that was actually true for a lot of the privateers and sailors, even those who were with the actual Royal Navy. After the Spanish War of Succession, a lot of the privateers who were basically given these legal papers that said, hey, you can go and raid the enemy ships during the war because it's wartime. All's fair in love and war. Well, when the war was over, those guys really weren't welcomed home. A lot of times the crown wanted to disavow any kind of knowledge of them or any kind of association, because some of what the privateers did was well over the line. It wasn't just stealing merchant ships. It was up to and including murder, what we would now consider to be war crimes. So a lot of them stayed where they were. They already had established settlements and bases there. And Blackbeard could have been on one of these privateers. He could have been with the Royal Navy. And even the guys with the Royal Navy decided to stay because there was a huge amount of downsizing at this point. This was right before England really became the greatest navy in the world. This is when they were still building, not far off, but they were still building. Spain and France still had very comparable sized navies, although in decline. So he possibly saw a lucrative option there.
So he travelled to the outlaw haven of Nassau and turned pirate.
And Nassau was as he said, pirate haven. You can see it in Black Sails. It's done fairly well. I can't say how truly accurate it is, but it's actually done pretty well because of the fact that Nassau, like a few other pirate havens, were very democratic. And they wanted to do something different than the royal aspect of life, because that's what kept them down. That's what kept them low. And here they were rich, they were wealthy, and they made their own rules. And a lot of times those rules were done by majority votes. Even on ships, the captain may have had command in certain aspects, but a lot of things could be done or had to be done by the vote, including punishment. You'll know that there was not really any flogging, which is basically hitting a sailor for disobeying orders or for as punishment with a rod. They really didn't do that because it was too much like the Royal Navy. So they wanted to break away from a lot of that. So a lot of it was democratic. And speaking about Blackbeard's flag, this is a very familiar thing. You drive in North Carolina, you're going to see this on someone's car at least once a week, especially if you're near the coast. I can count you 10 guys that either have this in their house, garage, man cave, whatever the hell you want to call it, or it's tattooed on them. It's a very famous symbol here. An interesting thing to note about the flags for pirates, in most cases, if a pirate's flag was black, then you were typically going to give up your goods, but you would keep your life. If a pirate's flag was red, then it meant that there was going to be no quarter, no mercy, no prisoners. If it was black and red, like this one has the red implement, it's like you pick. How you react is how they're going to respond. And of course, you have death, the devil, death. Jolly Roger was typically meant to be death, skull and crossbones. Here is actually the devil drinking and stabbing the heart. Hell's heart, I stabbeth thee. So.
In the spring of 1717, he sailed as second in command to the pirate captain Ben Hornigold. They cruised America's east coast, seizing and plundering 8 merchant ships.
Okay, so now this is probably the most lucrative area at that time of the United States. Boston would have been very lucrative, but it was heavily, heavily guarded. The bulk of the British forces were either in Charleston or Boston. Possibly a little bit New York too, but Charleston was a little less guarded, and there was a lot more allies for the pirates here. Hornigold, very famous pirate. I want to say that Hornigold actually was one of the few pirates that was able to retire and finish his life peacefully. Not every pirate could do that. It was a live by the sword, die by the sword lifestyle, but Hornigold was different. He was much more, and there were a few like this. Was it Gentleman Jack, I think, or Gentleman something? But there was a few others who were looked at as being more upstanding and kind of setting a good image. They were intelligent and they lived older lives and were able to retire peacefully with whatever wealth they had, which you'd be surprised how wealthy some of these guys could actually get and how quickly they could blow that money too. But yeah, this whole area right here is just lucrative with tobacco, with cotton, rice. South Carolina was a huge producer of rice. Prior to the Civil War, North Carolina was a huge producer of wine. So it was a very lucrative area.
Ships. That summer, Blackbeard met Stede Bonnet, known as the Gentleman Pirate, and took over command of his ship, the Revenge. Then he returned to terrorize the American colonies once more, capturing 15 ships in just 3 weeks. Blackbeard used fear as a weapon, terrifying opponents into a quick surrender. But there's no record of him ever torturing or murdering any of his victims.
And that's something you didn't really have to do if you could get them to it, if you could intimidate them. It meant that, number one, you could possibly get their ship without having to destroy it too much. You wanted to cripple the ship, but you didn't want to sink it, because then you lose your goods and you lose possible a ship, which could have been worth a lot of money. Most pirate ships were actually stolen and converted. Even Queen's Anne Revenge was converted from a French ship. So you really had to be careful with that. The other aspect is, if you got into a fight, there's a good chance that some of your men might go down as well. So you didn't want to take a chance that you could either lose the lives of some of your men or lose your own life. So if you could get them to surrender without a fight, pretty much everyone can walk away. You walk away richer, they walk away poorer, but you walk away. One trick that he did, he would put cannon fuses in his beard and light, and so there'd be smoke billowing around his beard to make him look even more menacing and scary. And you already hear these tales of, oh my God, it's Blackbeard. You know, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Just give up. Just give up. Give up. Maybe he'll show us mercy. There you go.
That autumn, Blackbeard sailed to the Windward Islands. Off St. Vincent, he captured La Concorde, a French ship carrying 500 slaves bound for the sugar plantations. Blackbeard refitted the ship with 40 guns and renamed her Queen Anne's Revenge.
Yep.
He now commanded one of the most powerful warships in the Caribbean.
And this ship wasn't actually as big as some of the other ship of the lines that you will see in the British Navy, but it was fast, and he made very good use of it.
With 4 ships and 250 crew, Blackbeard rampaged through the West Indies, capturing and burning ships, as well as the French colony of Guadeloupe. Then he sailed west. In the Gulf of Mexico, he wrought havoc amongst Spanish shipping and earned himself a new nickname, El Gran Diablo, the Great Devil. But
again, all part of that aspect of fear, using fear as a weapon and using it as a way to subdue your opponents before you fight them. It's a very old strategy Sun Tzu had in Sun Tzu's Art of War. It was a similar strategy of try to do anything you can to win the battle without fighting the battle.
Despite many prizes, morale was low amongst Blackbeard's crew. They hadn't had a big haul in months. The men wanted gold. So Blackbeard sailed to the Florida coast, where the Spanish treasure fleet had been wrecked 3 years before. His men searched the wrecks for gold and silver, but scavengers had already taken the easy spoils, and they found little of value.
And that Spanish wreck is a big plot line in Black Sails. It's a huge plot line in Treasure Island, which is kind of Black Sails is the prequel of. But it is still, even to this day, people are looking for that. I think they found 7 of the 11 ships, or maybe 8 of them. I can't remember, no, 7, because I think there's 4 left they still have to find. And they have found millions upon millions of dollars worth of gold and other treasures from those ships. And these were big Spanish galleons, which are huge ships for their time. And yeah, I mean, that's something that people are looking for, and still to this day. But yeah, so Blackbeard was a huge part of that Treasure Island mythos. Even Edgar Allan Poe had the treasure bug, kind of along those same lines too, of the Spanish gold.
Blackbeard continued north to Charleston, South Carolina. In the boldest move of his career, he blockaded the port for 6 days, seizing goods and hostages from any ships entering or leaving the harbor. Continuing up the coast, Blackbeard entered Topsail Inlet, looking for a hideaway. But his
that's right there in North Carolina.
Flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, ran aground and sank. Gentlemen.
And they found it now. They found the ship, and they've been able to do a lot of archaeological work with Queen Anne's Revenge. So it's really amazing. This is an intact pirate ship. And not just any pirate ship. It is the most famous. The only way you could get more famous than this was to find Captain Kidd's gold as far as pirate mythos. Because this is the most famous pirate ever. And his ship. We have it. And it's just super cool.
Stede Bonnet now chose to part ways with Blackbeard. 4 months later, he was dead, hanged in Charleston as a pirate.
Yep.
Blackbeard marooned part of his crew and sailed with his closest companions to Bath, North Carolina, where he secured a royal pardon from the governor as part of a pirate amnesty. He and his men set up base on Ocracoke Island, but were soon back to their old ways.
And if you know anything about Ocracoke Island, it's part of the Outer Banks chain. These are some islands that are in North Carolina, around the Pamlico Sound, and which is the largest freshwater sound on the eastern coast. But it's also, these were some of the first settlements here in the New World. There's even in Roanoke, which is not very far away from all that, there is even where the Lost Colony was, which we'll probably do a video on soon too.
Plundering 2 French ships out at sea. Blackbeard claimed his loot, 180 barrels of sugar, came from an abandoned ship, but few were fooled. Alexander Spotswood, Lieutenant Governor of the neighbouring colony of Virginia, now decided to deal with Blackbeard once and for all. Flouting colonial law, he sent a naval task force to North Carolina with orders to take Blackbeard, dead or alive.
There was no intention of bringing him alive. If you look at the historical record, there was really no intention of bringing him alive. Spotswood wanted Blackbeard dead for several reasons. He knew that if bringing him alive, he would make a folk hero out of him, or even a bigger folk hero out of him. But the other aspect was he wasn't worried about Blackbeard's martyrdom, because he figured that if you cut the head off the snake, everyone's going to fall off. Everyone's going to die. And that may basically been true. But what he really wanted to do, Spotswood had been, and his colonial militias and force and navy had been embarrassed by Blackbeard up to this point, because Blackbeard kept getting away. They could never get him. And so he was really just fed up with it at this point, and he wanted to end it. And the person that he sent, and they're probably going to say the name, and I can't remember the name of the lieutenant, I think it was lieutenant, that went after him, wanted that fame. They wanted him dead. They wanted that fame. And you'll see what they did to him afterwards. And there's a really creepy, depends on how you want to look at it, creepy story of Blackbeard after death that's part of what happened.
Lieutenant Maynard of the Royal Navy and 60 men caught the pirates off guard at Ocracoke Island. Blackbeard was outnumbered 3-1, but he fought skillfully and bravely to the end. Finally, he was cut down by one of Maynard's men. His body was found to be covered with 20 sword cuts and 5 bullet wounds. Blackbeard's head was cut off and fixed to the bowsprit of the Navy sloop to prove he was dead. Blackbeard's reign of terror lasted less than 2 years, during which he plundered an estimated 40 ships. But his careful and deliberate use of terror forged a legend that would last for centuries.
So a lot of people talk about the pardon. A lot of pirates did get pardons from various governors. The issue was that one governor's pardon wouldn't protect you in another state at the time. This is a pseudo-feudalism that we're dealing with here at this point. Virginia was not the same as North Carolina. They had different laws. So he was pardoned by Governor Eden of North Carolina, who was the second governor of North Carolina. A lot of people, for some reason, say Tryon. Tryon did not come to become governor for another 30 years or so. Tryon built Tryon's Palace in New Bern, beautiful place. Check it out if you're ever there. But he wasn't even part of this conversation. Eden was. And Eden is obviously another famous name here in North Carolina. He pardoned Blackbeard. And by giving him that pardon, he basically effectively said, I'm not going after him. You other governors do what the hell you want. He's fine with me because he's not raiding my ships. So that pardon, it's not like it was a king's pardon, but it didn't have the same effect as if the king himself had given it. It was basically a governor's pardon. And so it only affected in North Carolina. So now Spotswood has this bug up his ass. He wants to get him, and this is what he does. So let's see what it says. I got a story about Blackbeard. So let's see.
Epic History TV relies on the generosity of fellow...
Yeah, go check them out. They're pretty cool. Epic History is really cool. I love it, actually. So Blackbeard, that was it. Yeah, he relied on terror, and he did it effectively. He was able to get you to surrender before you ever even fought him because you were so scared of him. And that's great because he lived, he got his money. He might even take some people along with him if they were willing to go. So the story we have of Blackbeard was no one knows what happened to his head, supposedly. It all depends on which legend tale you want to hear. One of the tales that we always heard growing up in North Carolina was about something called Blackbeard's Cup. And what that was there was a judge here in North Carolina who was a historian, and he did a lot of tales, but he did a lot of spooky tales. I mean, he knew a lot of ghost stories. And this is a guy that was born, I mean, hell, I think he was like my age back in like the 30s and 40s. So he was born right around the turn of the 20th century. And I think his college student, he went down to Swansboro area. It might have been in Mako, which has another famous ghost story. But it was this secret thing that he went into, and he drank from this cup. And it was supposed to be Blackbeard's cup. Now, you might be thinking, oh, it was Blackbeard's goblet or not. And really what it was, what he describes it as, he had never seen it since he's dead now. And you can find some information on it, so I'd suggest check it out. But what it was the top part of Blackbeard's skull, from like this part on, eyes cut, and they were drinking out of his skull. And it was a cup fashioned supposedly for Maynard or maybe possibly even Spotswood. We're not sure, it depends on what the legend says. I'm getting a little bit out of the historical context. I know I mentioned earlier about historians and you want to be factual, but to tell a story, and Herodotus would embellish and elaborate. So I don't want to do that too much, but it's a pretty spooky, creepy tale if you want to think about it. But yeah, so Blackbeard's cup was supposedly the top half of his skull. And the last known whereabouts was somewhere here in North Carolina. Not sure where. A lot of old money here in North Kakalaki. So you never know. Anyway, that was pretty cool. I love that. That was Blackbeard. We're gonna do one on the Lost Colony. Maybe I can post that later today or tomorrow. This one's coming up here soon. Check out Legends of the Carolingian Age. A lot of my historical influences are in there. A lot of home stuff is in there. If you look at one of the books, Fate of Kings and Queens, you'll see a recipe for North Carolina barbecue. It's in there. All right, the good stuff, the real barbecue. All right, guys. It's been fun. Thanks. Remember, like and subscribe. Take care.